When you're fed up with fighting food and your body, join us here. I'm Allie Shapiro, creator of the Truce with Food program and your host for Insatiable, where we explore the hidden aspects of fighting our food, our weight, and our bodies, and dive deep into nutrition science and true whole health. Fair warning, this is not your parents' health care. This is a big rebel yell to those who crave meaning, hunger for truth, and whose lust for life is truly insatiable. Believe me, freedom awaits. Welcome, insatiable listeners, to Season 4, Episode 2, Your Inner Food Rebel. Is this self-sabotage or self-protection? So the theme of our season right now is clarifying the issue, right? So that we can move forward in a new way. And I think part of the reason that as a collective whole, we're still struggling with body image, with weight, with health issues, and kids younger and younger are struggling is because of today's episode and that we really don't understand self-sabotage all that well. And we're going to talk about today how often what we think of as sabotaging behaviors around our food are actually protective. So if you've ever been told you have an inner food rebel or you have this inner body critic, I hope we can shift your mindset or at least open up the possibility that these might actually be protective thoughts, protective behaviors. And Rebecca, who is trained in inner family systems, for those of you who like theory like I do, she's trained in this. And this is a dynamic and holistic leadership framework, and it's a therapeutic framework for understanding the various protective sides of ourselves. So we're going to talk about those parts today. We're going to talk about why we eat to protect ourselves, why we criticize our bodies to protect ourselves, and some of the first steps towards non-food ways to self-protect. And again, this mindset shift for my clients is life-changing. Not only does it open up compassion, but it acknowledges that there's a whole part within us, no matter how broken, frustrated, unhealthy we feel, there is access to a whole part of us, and that these quote unquote broken parts are actually protecting us, right? But we can access a wholeness within that to move forward. So you're going to love today's episode. You might want to bring a pen handy because there's going to be lots of ahas, and pay attention, especially to the end where we really kind of wrap up things in a really concise, powerful way for you to think about. And if you like this kind of content and you want to explore your own protective side around eating, consider my brand new released program called Why Am I Eating This Now? And you can access that at allieshapiro.com/Why Am I Eating This Now? If you want to dive deeper into these kind of concepts. But enjoy today's episode with Rebecca's brilliance. Welcome, Insatiable listeners. I am so excited to have Rebecca Basching back on Insatiable. Her episode from season 3, episode 3 on trauma and its effects on our body image and food was off the charts hit. Takes me back to Casey Kasem. Did you ever listen to him?
Yes, I'm dating myself. I did.
Did you like me, wait for the song you loved and hit record and play at the same time so you could record it off of his countdown?
Not only did I do that, but I would keep a little notebook and write them all out. So yeah.
I love that.
I did.
So thanks for being back on today, because one of the things that was the concepts that people really loved about that podcast, and it's life-changing for my clients in their work with their quote inner food rebel or inner body critic, is in my work, we look at it as a protective voice that really they want to beat up their body when they feel emotionally at risk, when their belonging is at risk in some way. And of course, there is a culture that tells us you can only have a certain body to be accepted. However, if we look a little deeper, it also prevents us from taking the very risks that will make us feel connected and belong. And so I wanted to talk to you today because you have experience in inner family systems, which is not, I wish it was a more mainstream, therapeutic tool, both in the coaching world and in leadership. So I wanted to have you on to talk about what's going on here. More in detail, you and I talking about this, that, whoa, maybe I am not weak. Maybe I don't ignore and neglect this part, right? Because I think traditionally we were taught, don't listen to your inner critic.
Right.
Say thanks, but no thanks, instead of actually cultivating a relationship with it, which changes everything. And
yes.
Talk to us.
Okay. Thank you, Allie, for having me back. And I am so thrilled to hear that your listeners dug it, because that's how I felt when I circled back to this approach. Believe it or not, internal family systems, which is founded by a guy named Richard Schwartz. So he's grew up in the Midwest and now he's in the East Coast, Boston area. He is a family therapist. He's PhD trained. We both have very similar mindsets on how we view the family and systems theory. And he was treating eating disorders, believe it or not. And that is actually how he discovered this approach, treating bulimia in particular. So this approach really cultivated out of the treatment of folks with really serious food and body issues. And that's when I was first exposed to it at a conference for professionals who treat eating disorders, and circled back to it a few years ago and realized that this is really where I want to take not only my own clinical practice, but in my work with leaders and organizations. And so really what this approach is, Allie, how many times have you been like, part of me wants the vanilla, but a part of me wants the chocolate, right? So like the choices. Or other times it's like a part of me really wants to go away for the weekend and a part of me just wants to couch potato it this weekend. We all talk like that, right? That's very common. And so Richard Schwartz started seeing this and got curious and started engaging with these parts. Because the thing with really serious eating disorders in particular, and frankly, the whole disorder eating spectrum, and this is something that we talk a lot in our clinical team at my practice and in a lot of talks that I give, is if there was one thing working, we'd all be doing it. And things aren't. This issue is only getting worse. And the work that you're doing, Allie, is essential, because it's really helping people kind of pause on the noise and look within and really write their own story. So I'm so grateful for that. So with IFS, in a nutshell, I'm going to try not to use too many nerdy therapy words. I'm trying to translate this.
We're a nerdy bunch, though.
Right. No, you are. But seriously, becoming a therapist, that kind of ruined me being able to talk to people. People look at me and glaze over. And so I'm like, okay, how to speak human again, how to not talk about this stuff. And when I'm with a therapist right now, my husband's there and he's just like, oh my gosh, that is like therapist showdown right there, So, but that's also so distancing. I think that's problematic too. So really what Schwartz found out is discover that just like we have like a genogram, right? Or a family map, how you plot your family tree and you see all these relationships, we almost flip that inward and discover that we are made with this beautiful, incredible multiplicity system. And so this is really kind of, for those of you that have very strong thinking parts, I think all of us do. I suspect your crowd does too, because they're the curse of the smarty pants crowd. It's really hard for our thinking protectors to relax around this. So hang in there. But really, there's this whole inner world that we're born with that evolves. Now, we're not born with binge eating tendencies. We're not born with shame-prone inner critics, but these beautiful internal parts of ours adapt when life happens, right? And so to break this down on a high level, this inner world is composed of a couple kind of segments. And the first part is the self. And that's why really he talks about self-leadership. I often talk about soul leadership. This whole practice has been a very holy thing for me, personally and professionally. So self or soul leadership. And this was the game changer, Allie. When I heard this resonated with me in my worldview, and I just didn't even know it. But a lot of times we've talked about trauma, right? We were talking about that on our last podcast. And people have been through things that you go, okay, you know what? They're never going to be the same again. And it makes sense. There's just some stuff that happens on this planet that is hard to get our brains around. And it's amazing to see people survive and function after that. And we're like, hey, your best, may never be what it would have been if without this, right? And Schwartz is saying, you know what? There's this part of the self that remains unchanged. And that really what's buried under is all these parts that are protective. And I'll get into that. And so that was amazing, because often there's this narrative of you're damaged. You're permanently broken. Now, someone's health and wellness and what their best is, it's going to vary because of story, for sure. But this message, this underlying pathological message that can I swear?
Of course.
Okay. If shit happens, sorry.
Ooh,
My kids, I know, a little crazy. We'll see if I get to the F-bomb. But, when the shit happens in our lives and it wounds us and it shakes the fabric of our safety, how we see ourselves in the world, really what is these other parts that we call protectors, all right? And that's what I alluded to, or didn't allude to, I talked about in our last interview. And these protectors kind of fall into a couple groups, right? We've got our managers. This is our perfectionist. This is our task lister. This is our empathy. This is our people pleaser. This is our goofball. These are the managers. And don't get too hung up, I want to say to readers, on who goes where, because that you can go get a little dizzy on that. Don't worry about that. But you may start to get curious about it. And so you get these managers, what they do, their main job is to keep the pain of what another segment is called the exiles. So when we have difficult life experiences happen and we don't work it through, and our system, our bodies, our emotional nervous system holds onto it, then these younger parts of ourselves, which are often younger, but not always, because usually the stuff that happens is, at a younger age, but we can have difficult things happen our whole life. These parts are called exiles, right? They get exiled. And these managers want to exile the pain, the shame, the loneliness, the fear, because we can't function, right? If we're always in fetal position. So these managers come in, and all of these protectors, I want to say, their number one job is to protect us. That's their mission. They have 100% good intentions. And that's, again, the mindset flip on some of these internal critics and other parts that often get shamed by us and by culture. So then these managers, we keep it all together. Like when I feel out of control, I want to clean the house. If my husband moves a coaster out of spot, he gets it from me in those really tense days. I need order, because the fear is these managers is we can't let the pain overwhelm. So they are entrenched. Then you've got these other parts. They originally were called firefighters, and some people still call them that, but I really like the term soothers and comforters. Now, Allie, these are the ones that you talk to your clients a lot about and the people in your community. These are the binge eaters and the purgers and the restrictors and the calorie counters and the body checks and scanners. These are the drinkers and the drugs and the shopping and the sex and the suicide and self-harm, all of this stuff. And then these parts come in when the managers the work isn't happening and the exiles start to overwhelm. They come in and shut it down. So they numb, they protect, they disconnect, because their system is, oh my gosh. And the only way these protectors relax in the end is if these exiles are able to unburden their hurts. And at the heart of it, if you picture the self and the soul, it's just layers of managers and protectors and then exiles all around it. But once the system starts to relax and build trust and unburden, then we can lead from more of a place of self. And the qualities of self are all these C words. Again, makes sense, especially as someone who's been a part of Brené Brown's community and working and facilitating her work with people. Words like courage, compassion, connectedness, creativity, calm, clarity, confidence. These C's, we know when we're operating from a place of self or soul leadership, when we can honestly, and curiosity. I didn't say that one. That was the 8th one, I think. If I repeated that, my apologies. And so that's really the other part of this healing, is when the soul, the self, connects with these managers, connects with these exiles. That's when the healing happens. It's not a guru. It's not this external stuff that helps. When we connect with others, and so much from an attachment theory perspective, often is focused on our connections with others, which is crucial. It's in our DNA. You touched on, to have that belonging, that connection. But oh my gosh, all of a sudden, when my system, I started doing this, connecting with my protectors from a place of self-leadership, the healing that I experienced, it is unprecedented. And sometimes we can have spontaneous unburdenings just by reading a book or going to a movie or having a great conversation. And sometimes we need someone to help us facilitate that. Because when I first started to get to know my internal system, I call it this to my clients. You get popcorned. All of a sudden, these different parts are it's like you're drawn to the light, And so this, at first, and again, I'm not one that can swim in the deep end of woo-woo. I have a respect for things that are woo-woo and mystery. I really do. But I had my skeptical managers, and I've got some parts that can go to cynical, and then they get judged by other parts of my system too. So you've got these protectors that are managers and self-soothers and comforters. You've got these exiled parts that are holding the pains of our story physically, emotionally, spiritually for some. And you've got this place of the self or the soul that really, again, to me, that's holy, is that when we are connecting with these internal parts that are judging ourselves for these choices. So again, so let's think about the binger or the emotional eater, right? And then you got the managers will come in and go, oh no, shut that shit down. You need to go away. And then the restrictor manager will come in and go, we're just going to go cleanse for a while. We're going to just stay away from all sugar, all carbs, all dairy. We're going to eat air for 10 days, right?
That's filtered because it's all dirty.
Excuse me, forgive me, filtered air. Yeah. And so, but those are all managers there. And the tricky part is with these comforter and soothers, they get shamed not only by our internal critics and managers, but for the world, right? We embrace the perfectionist. We embrace someone who can manage the restricting and do these like really intensive regimented diet plans or the exercise plans and not move for love and joy and health, mental clarity. And so these parts get celebrated. But then all of a sudden, our culture has a thing about bodies and what is a sign of health and what isn't. And then there's a lot of judgment internally. Like it feels like, oh, if I show up in the world looking like this, and this may be however you perceive yourself, right? Not be how we perceive, those in front of us. Then we think we got to change. And then it just gets loud between our ears, right? It's just this internal noise. And what I realized is that noise that my clients were presenting that I was wrestling with was really these internal conversations. And then once I started connecting with genuine curiosity, not from my intellectual parts that wanted to analyze them and categorize them and tell them what to do, but a genuine curiosity without an agenda. Like, tell me more. What are you really afraid of? What's your main role? And what are you afraid would happen if you didn't do it? And sometimes this process is slow because like for folks with eating struggles, there's usually a cluster of these protectors. And sometimes it's like a cluster mosh pit because they have love-hate relationships internally. And so sometimes it's slowly building a relationship with them. And this isn't something that you can rush. One of the kind of lingo-y phrases in IFS is slower is faster, which in a business leadership community, when I say that, they're like, yeah, no, I want efficiency, which is a manager. I want excellence. I want productivity, manager, all of these parts. And they're all good. So I want to also make sure we look at these parts. Their intent is good. Their intent is to help us. And sometimes our managers and our firefighter, comforters, soothers, they carry burdens too, just like our exiles. So sometimes I work on unburdening these protectors and the pain they're holding so they can relax and get to their original role. And so this is like, I hope I did a good job there, because this is a fundamental mindset shift on how we look at healing, how we look at professional growth and development, how we look at, even working with others. Because one of my missions too is working with leaders who have communities and how they're showing up with self-leadership so that when people in their community, if they get triggered by them or they're struggling and not succeeding, how do they stay in a place of calm and clarity and confidence too, without getting sucked into that? And their manager's like, oh, you're a horrible leader. People in your community are failing. You need to, make it work. Or you just distance and say, oh, they're just not into it that much. And we push them away. So the thing about this work and what I love about being in IFS communities when I do trainings and workshops is just when you're in a community that are in that space. I mean, that's the kind of church we all need. A place of just a room full of people where it's like they're managing the different parts that are coming up and they're curious about it. And we speak from it. And I'm like, Allie, a part of me, and you speak for your parts, not from them. And advocate for them. But again, the toughest parts to relax are our thinking and intellectual parts, because they get confused and they think that they're yourself, your soul. So that's another layers. And then kind of on a more spiritual woo-woo component of this approach is sometimes we have what's called unattached burdens. And usually people get mad when you bring that up too early because they're like, that's too weird. And, but I think it's just important to name. So whatever your lens is on the things that are, not concrete, there's like guides and people call guides or angels or whatever that are in and help. And then other times there's burdens that are unattached that carry a lot of darkness and a lot of pain. And so sometimes some of the noise in our ears is not coming from in our system, but outside. And so there's actually beautiful ways to work with that too, but that's definitely more advanced. But I just wanted to name that because again, sometimes that people can spin with that a little bit. So, but not to get too worried about that. It's not like there's this whole like world out there. It's just kind of getting curious sometimes too about that. And just to show there's something really, and I think it's part of the reason why it's not mainstream, like cognitive behavioral therapy. Change your thoughts to change your feelings, to change your actions. It's tidy. It's clean. It's measurable. You can
linear.
study it. It's research the shit out of it. And there's an element where but all theory is cognitive. Everything is cognitive. And so this takes into the body. So much of this is connecting to what we feel in our body. The neuroscience behind this is incredible. The research they're doing at the Self-Leadership Foundation. So if you guys want to, any of your listeners want to, let's go to selfleadership.org. You can read more about it. You can there's a great bookstore. I'd recommend starting with Introduction to Internal Family Systems and You Are the One You've Been Waiting For. Buy them on that site because if people are selling them on Amazon, they're selling them for like $80 and trying to be lame. And there's trainings depending on your professional background. Some people just show up at these trainings. I'm actually putting together training for people who are in leadership to understand this model. And I integrate it with Brene Brown's research and her methodologies. And so just to help bring these principles and this language into the arena, have different conversations. Because again, when it comes to the work you do, Allie, addressing our relationship with food and our body and movement, if it's coming from a protector-led, manager-led way to change, we're not going to get change. But if we can do it from a place of self or soul leadership, that's when I see people starting to shift. And in my clinical arena, when I'm doing, this is a lot of trauma work. And I kind of don't worry about the behaviors. We get so scared of, they're drinking, they're self-harming, they're not doing this. And it's, they're just doing their job. And I know for me, it's helped. So just keep working with those parts and building relationship with the system. So that is a high view. I touched on some probably potentially maybe weird stuff to your community. I hope not.
No, I love it. And I have some questions there's so much that you said that I just love. And I think first of all, I love that you said the behaviors, because one of the big things that's life-changing for my clients is realizing what we call the inner protector is driving the behavior, right? People are looking at the food behavior itself or whatever, but it's like, no. There's something behind driving that. And that's really helpful. But what I want to go back to is, first of all, what you said is that there is this part of ourselves that is whole. And I love that you call it the soul, because I think of it as the soul too. And the lens that I look at it, because I have seen food and body image as this need for recognition for who we are and exactly who we are, and being invisible or being seen in the wrong ways. I mean, we see that on the surface of what our body looks like. Will we be invisible if we don't look a certain way? Or are we wrong because we're not beautiful according to conventional standards? So I see it as this quest for like self-acceptance of exactly who we are. And to me, that's the soul, right? The soul's quirky. It's individualistic, right? In yin and yang theory, like spirituality is where we become unattached and we're all one, which is the yang archetype. But the yin archetype is the soul, and the soul is that quirky side of ourselves, right? So I love that you said it's soul-centered. And I think what for listeners is they feel like they're broken, right? Like dieting will make you feel like one of the things that people come to me, how do I fix this, right? How do I fix myself is the question. And I think what you're saying is so beautiful. And what I believe and what Interfamily Systems believes is there's a part of you aren't, first of all, you're not broken. Second of all, there is a part of you that if you can learn to understand these sides of yourself, you'll have access to that part that is whole. And I think also because my clients tend to be pretty brainy, like you said, or out in the world, they're also confused why they can be so smart or so successful in certain areas, but then feel so broken, and how this brokenness really
Let's talk about that.
Leadership. Yeah.
We got to talk about that because you nailed it. That is the one reoccurring thing where I see people shrink from their stories. I see the shame start to spike, and then their system starts to really get flooded, and then behaviors, the protectors, the soothers, and the comforters, that the ones that other parts of them feel really ashamed about, right, kick in. And then it just becomes an internal mosh pit again without self-leadership, right? It's parts led versus self or soul led. And this is so crucial. I feel like the narrative of, I've worked on this, I should be done with this by now, is one, that mindset, the parts that are holding that mindset really are, we need to get curious about that, because there's the fear of, I want to be done working on this. I mean, who doesn't want to be done working on their struggles, right? I still want to be in PTSD. It's okay. It's a lifelong, no, said no one ever. And so I have empathy for that. So I just want to say that. But it's especially for leaders and people struggling in life. And there's that narrative of, who do you think you are to be showing up if you're still struggling with this? Versus getting curious about, there must be something else going on in my system. Instead of, this is a sign of failure from a parts-led view, versus a soul-led part would be like, just getting curious, like, wow, I just got overwhelmed with a lot of stuff that felt familiar. I'm surprised, and noticing the surprise and the judgment and the fear and the overwhelm and the critical parts and the panicky parts, and and it's kind of slowing that down. And so really starting to map our inner influences is powerful, and really start to do that. So, I'll make a promise to you, Allie, I'm working on a guide to help people map their inner influences, and I'll send that for you to send to your community, just to get, and if they only promise to give me feedback on it. So, because that has been really helpful to start that process too. And also the thing about the soul is, it's not a part. I just want to be very clear. The self in this place called Self at Dick Schwartz discovered, is not a part. It's unchanging. It grows with us. And that really at the heart of self-leadership is integration. And so that we can, sometimes these parts will blend a little bit. We need a little bit of our taskmaster. We need our empathy. But if we are in empathy too much, we're overwhelmed with everyone's stuff. We need our thinking parts that are analyzing and strategic, and the parts that don't like to be late or whatever they may be. We need our goofball to get into it. So they kind of, we can blend with them, but when we're overwhelmed and we're led by those protectors versus the self, that's when we start to feel overwhelmed. And it really is taking a pause and scanning our body, noticing what we're feeling, where we're feeling it, and how we feel towards it. That's a great place to start to kind of tease out some of these different parts that are coming up and getting to know your system.
Yeah, I think of it, I often use the analogy with clients of, like, remember the game Trivial Pursuit, where you try to get all the different pie pieces?
Yeah.
Like, some of them are like, you have the container, right? Like, you are whole, but sometimes you have more pieces than others. Sometimes they're missing. And so when Rebecca's talking about piece-led versus self-led, she's saying, like, maybe only the orange piece is present, and it's knocking all, you're filling up your trivial pie piece with only orange and managerial, versus letting all sides be filled in with exactly who you are, whether it's your quirky side or your empathetic side, but having a container for all of that, because that's when we do feel whole, when we can bring all of ourselves together.
And including our critics, and including our soothers and comforters. I mean, we weren't born with someone that wanted to drink a bottle of wine every day.
Yeah.
And so usually these parts, the original role, and getting used to them. And here's the thing too, that I've learned about self-leadership is not just the soul, and the soul self, but these protectors too, they grieve. So when there's been wrongs done to us, or we see things happening in our world, like every 5 minutes these days, grief can also tap into the pain that our exiles are holding. And then our managers want to come in and shut it all down. And so, but grief is absolutely essential to, but that takes a lot of trust. And so a lot of these parts aren't going to relax. Like, you can't just say, hey, emotional leaning part, I need some space. Like, you wouldn't just go up to a stranger and say, I need some space, please. Like, can you go away? So it really is cultivating a relationship with our internal system, like we would with people in our lives.
Yeah, I love that you talked about that. And you talked about trust, because I've noticed the more that people start to trust themselves, the more they're okay with some of the more quote unquote dangerous parts of grief or whatnot, because their system's a little bit more resilient. They feel more trusting of themselves, right? That they, like, at least with my clients, like, they don't turn to food anymore. It's like, one of my clients was like, oh my God, I thought coming into Truth with Food, I was going to learn how to do this perfectly. And I realized this is about being imperfect and being okay with that. So one of the things I want to talk about that you alluded to, and I'm just going to kind of capture it in a different way, is like to go slow. Like truth is paradox, right? The paradox is truth. So to go slow, we go fast, as fast as, quote unquote, as fast as possible. I know you guys say faster, but it's more linear. And what we embrace dissolves. What we resist persists. What we embrace dissolves. And so for people listening, if you're like, wow, this just even sounds overwhelming, it's like this stuff is controlling us, whether we look at it or not. And if we can start to really look at it rather than thinking it's our body or that we have food issues, it really changes things. And you do want to start to become more and more curious and more self-led. Haven't you experienced? That's what I've experienced.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I feel like that's what's so important with leaders like you, bringing these concepts to your community. It's like a domino effect contagion of reshaping how we look at struggle and how we look at and how we respond to grief, how we respond to shame, how we respond to fear. And if instead of it's like, oh, what are you noticing? How are you feeling towards that? Or instead of we take it on for the other person. Because I mean, there's nothing like your closest relationships that just brings up a full-on parts party, right? My husband came home. He's in graduate school right now. So he teaches AP US history, and then he's going to grad school. So he'd come home at 9:00, and I was all lit up about something in our family, extended family. And so I decided just to I was not self-led. It was like a parts-led. And I was like, and this, and this, and this, and this thing. And he looks at me and he said, it's 9:10. There's absolutely nothing I can do about anything you said right now. So I'm going to bed. Self-leadership. That was wisdom. He was putting his parts as he instead of speaking from his protectors where he's like, are you kidding me? Look at the clock. Do you understand what I've been doing all day? How can you, this is not great. He could have responded that way. And then immediately I was like, oh, and I had compassion for the parts that really needed to be heard right then. And I wasn't paying attention to them, and they wanted him to fix it, and they were not turning towards me. And I had compassion then for the hurt he was feeling. And I was like, I'll see you in bed in a few. I'm sorry. And that's just because the people closest to us, the other arena where we can feel spinny on issues we care deeply about. And we were talking about some of those issues before we started recording, Allie, like we care deeply about. Those are the areas that my judgy, my critical, not just to myself, but others. And now I don't have the bandwidth. It doesn't feel good if I show up and lead from a place of, F you suck, you're wrong. Even if I'm right. I mean, if I'm right about all that, it's starting to not, that's draining. That's not sustainable. When I'm fighting for things I believe in and advocating for things I believe in, if I'm doing it from a protective place versus a self-led place, then I can run the marathon if I'm in that self-led place. But burnout and all of the things that come with that, or when we are leading, even when we're doing and fighting for great things, our own health, or to make the world a better place, if we're parts-led, it's not sustainable.
Yeah, the metaphor that came to mind is I think of the justice system in our culture. Like we should be doing restorative justice. The people who, commit crimes, and granted, this is like a whole other different conversation, but it's like what we do, even for people who like have marijuana on them, which now that rich white dudes like Rich Bain or John Boehner can make money off of, we're decriminalizing, right? But then we put all these people away for drugs, and prison usually makes people worse off, right? There's not a lot of restoration going. And I feel like we do that to the parts of ourselves. Look, we have to figure out how to give restorative justice to those parts to ourselves.
Beautiful.
That are frustrated or were hurt and then lashed out, or are still lashing out at ourselves. Because that's often, we project onto other people when we're really trying to protect ourselves. Because I get judgy about things that I care about. And I can be great with people around their food and I'm great with that. But with people who have certain political beliefs, I have no agency around. I just lose my shit,
Exactly.
And it doesn't help.
No, even though we're right.
I know.
That's the point. So, and it's like, is being right more important than relationship with self and others? Is being right more important than the relationship with self and others? I have to reply. And some days I fail miserably and I blurt it all out and I have a surge of dopamine rush, and then the shame comes of like, Rebecca, that was out of your core values. That was not okay. And even the guilt, more so than guilt. Some days it's shame depending on who it was to. Like my husband's shame wanted to have a party with me, and it's like, no, I got this. It's okay. And having compassion for, there's nothing like family that goes to the jugular of whatever is a struggle in your life to tease that up. But I feel like too, this is really powerful because Dick Schwartz, he met with the Dalai Lama and presented this approach. He was one of 3 voices around psychotherapy that was invited to have an audience with him. He's been involved with the Middle East peace conversations and working in those arenas too. So if we're working with communities, it has to start from within. But to me, in this, my first job out of school was working in politics, worked in DC. So there's another part of my system that really is excited about this approach because the crash and burn methodology, we really advocate. We just got to go all out. And if we burn out, it's for a good cause. And I see so much talent and we're missing out on that talent. And the world needs more people to be able to run the marathon of this work and to be able to show up now more than ever and not to feel defeated and not to shrink and not to numb on a regular basis. And so that's why this mindset of really getting curious and again, even get curious about those inner critics. We want to kill the inner critic and bash the inner critic or, fire the perfectionist. And we can't, some of the key physics of the inner world are everyone has a self. Everyone. Ellie, everyone does. Just
even
saying.
Narcissists?
Everybody has a self. Yes. And that's been a game changer. Again, just because someone is living from a place of narcissism or sociopathy, I don't need to have them in my universe at all. But it helps my mental health. It helps how I show up if I'm not looking at all that. If I can have compassion from 100 miles away, that's better for me. It has nothing to do with them. It doesn't mean I also like people that need to be away from people and to be a part of getting them in a place where they're not hurting other people. That's very important to me. But to have compassion is about my own mental health and my own ability and my own mindset to run the marathon, to keep showing up every day. So the interface, everyone has a self. Parts can separate from the self. We talked about that. These managers, these soothers, the exiles, they can separate. And that's so it can be self-led. This one gets me, but hang with me on this one. Nothing can hurt you if you're not afraid of it. So when I first heard this, I was overwhelmed by my parts and I got up to the speaker and I said, "Are you kidding me? So if someone's got a gun to my head, I'm supposed to go, oh, I'm not afraid." And he's like, no. He's like, I'm talking about your internal world. Like if a difficult emotion comes up, like shame or fear or loneliness or grief, that if your system can trust that you yourself can handle it, your parts will relax. So I was like, okay, because I was like, oh no, I'm not down with this. I got very feisty parts came out. And so that is really powerful to and you can't destroy a part is the 4th one. And that is the game changer in the conversation we're having in the personal development community and the business community. You can't. It's like, I'm right-handed. I don't need my left arm, so I'm just going to cut it off. I'm going to get rid of it. It's inefficient, But understanding these roles and really understanding, getting curious, and that is easier to think. It's hard. You can think through it, but to really practice that takes work and support and community. But it's a wonderful journey to start.
One of the things I've noticed about that, though, is often this protective side of ourselves it's hyper developed, and as we start to develop self-trust and feel a sense of belonging, it doesn't mean that part goes away, but it's definitely less sharp.
Okay, shoot the hoop here. You just brought up another huge point. So yes, a couple of things. I have a protector. It's my Tasmanian devil part. And whenever this part, it circles around me. And whenever there's someone that I feel like is going to humiliate me publicly or attack me, that part gets really agitated and it gets dizzy. And it was really helpful to separate and understand that part. So that I have some parts that really don't trust well when there's certain vibes in the arena around me. But check this, for a lot of people, being in a place of calm and clarity and confidence, courage and compassion, that is when they were hurt. And so there's a lot of protectors that don't trust self-leadership, because that is when pain happened. And so this was a big aha for me in my own healing, but also in having compassion, empathy, and working with others. So to say the trusting because it's dangerous to be confident. It's dangerous because of maybe some people's stories. So I really wanted to name that. So thank you for jogging that up in my memory is crucial, because sometimes we make this platitude of just be confident, all is well. But everyone's system is different, and everyone's like burdens that their exiles are holding are concerned about different things, and we can't think through it. It may not seem logical, I'm doing air quotes right now, to feel scared when we're in a good place in life. But that is such a common pattern I've seen, not only at my clinical practice, but with the leaders I work with. And when we get curious about their stories, we realize, okay, there's some parts of their story where being in a place of confidence and courage and calm, that invited difficulty. It invited strife. It invited perpetrators. It invited bullies, you name it. So just wanted to throw that out there too.
I love that you brought that up, because I think that's really key for a lot of things. And, we often hear we're afraid of the other shoe dropping, and there's reason. And I'm glad you brought it up too, because one of the things I work on with clients is I'm like, look, the word story gets tossed around a lot right now, right? And they're like, okay, story I'm making up is this. And I'm like, no, we're defining that this story actually was real at one time. This was not something that you were making up, but your nervous system has a very real memory of certain events. And that's what we're trying to transform, is that today that those same feelings don't mean the same thing they did back then. But it's not just as easy to cognitively say, oh, this is a story that isn't true. It's like, no, it was true. At least the meaning that you made from it at one time was true.
And can I just build on that just a little bit?
Please.
And whatever the story a part may be telling, it may not be based on fact, but it may be that part's truth. So some of it may be connected to actual things that happened. And sometimes it's not, but it still is embedded in that part's mindset and worldview and our nervous system. So sometimes our thinking parts get so frustrated going, there's no reason I should be acting this way right now. There's no reason I should be feeling this way right now. And that is where a lot of people get stuck, and a lot of people have blocks. Or there's no reason I should feel so numb and disconnected. When the numb part comes up, I step back, I take a pause, because there must be some really big stuff going down internally. And we can't think our way through it. We have to feel our way through it. So yes, sometimes it's connected to real stuff. And sometimes it's just the fears of that part, whether they're based on fact, it's that part's truth. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or ask me clarification questions.
Well, no, because I think so let's take an example of that. Again, I'm looking at through the lens of my work. Like, one of the things that was really affecting me was I had been bullied in fifth grade. I never knew that I never knew that it had really affected me, especially as I was comparing myself, as building my business and comparing myself to other women, right? Not men, because it was women who bullied me. But the healing for me has been, at the time, because I was only in fifth grade, I made it about me, right? I didn't have the context of, hey, this is just what hurt people, et cetera, et cetera. And so now, even though I was bullied, the meaning of it I no longer think that it was about me. And I think I've healed the part of myself that felt wounded because of that. So it's true that I was what I would call bullied, right? We all bring different meanings to language. It was true that I was bullied, but the meaning that I make from it now is very different.
Yes. And part of that is the unburdening of the pain that your system has been holding. And just to kind of go with that excellent example. So if you found yourself spinning in a situation and you're like, what is going on? Why am I feeling so insecure and not capable? That's so weird. That's not logical. And you did the U-turn to check in, and you discovered there was still some pain your system was holding around that you didn't know about. And so even though you've done a ton of work on it, sometimes our system, there's more too. It's not just one aha. And so your thinking part and this younger part, this exile is holding the pain, you've done some incredible work. And then for example, you just notice that, like, wow, this feels familiar, but it's not logical. I know that was in the past. I know those people were doing the best they could and they were hurt, but there was still something your system's holding. So a lot of times, again, just to kind of circle back to why am I still struggling with this? It's like we're just like big onions, which is super annoying, but it's just part of being human and pushing our growth edges. And those things come up particularly when people are making brave decisions and putting themselves out there more, or stepping up with, their game personally with saying, I love you, or getting married, or starting a business, or speaking, or something that causes vulnerability. Then there's nothing like those experiences that will activate anything in our system that we're still carrying.
Yeah. And I just want to clarify for people listening is like, when I mean like I worked through it, I didn't mean like I just went back and was like, oh, that's what was happening. Like I actually had to test and experiment and put myself out there with groups of women over the past couple of years to test when is that safe. So I just want everyone to realize like it wasn't, because I love that you use the word aha, because I always joke that like, okay, we have the aha, but then we have to integrate it, right?
And I think it's a beautiful model you just gave, that this is the constant circle back. It's just a constant circle back and staying curious of, these tender parts of our story. And to really know, the comment that the quote that Brene, it's one of her most famous quotes of Brene Brown, is just owning our stories and loving ourselves through the process is one of the bravest things we can do. Like I never really got the depths of how powerful that was until I started doing IFS work. And it's like, this is your story. My daughter's on the autism spectrum and she's going through a season. She kind of woke up socially. Now she's like, I don't have autism. I don't want anyone to know. And I'm like, you know what? It's your story to tell. But in this house, we own our stories. And there's nothing to be ashamed of, even the hard parts. We own it. And then all right, I'm going to tell Brene Brown that you said that you're not owning your story. Okay, I won't. Maybe has slipped out in moments of frustration. But yeah, and I appreciate you talking, because the leaders that I'm drawn to, the friends, the people that I am drawn to are the people that they're not stuck in the past and oozing infected pain, but they're curious and humble and open to still having areas of growth and confident in the work that they have done and holding that tension. And I think you do that so beautifully, Allie. And that is contagious. That is modeling what we need. It gives us courage, saying, okay, all right, I can get curious about this too. And we can't bulldoze it through sustainably, but I really appreciate that. It's like years of circling back and checking in and getting curious. There isn't like a 3-step plan to never feeling like shit again. Well, there is live in a cave, don't own any technology, and don't have anyone in your life. Maybe.
And lots of chocolate.
Dark chocolate, please.
Yeah. So 2 other things that I want to ask you about and discuss based on what you shared in the opening of the overview is this idea that our managers are these thinking parts that have gotten us a lot. Because I know that for me, and I love that you're like, oh, the woo, and I'm still kind of like, I can see like, I get what you're saying. And I think for a lot of people when they're new to this, they're like, the protective side of themselves dismisses this because it involves this feeling sense. And I've always told my clients, like, look, we're not trying to dumb down your intelligence. We're just trying to dial up the feeling side of you, because that is also a source of intelligence as well. And so can you speak to that a little bit, of dialing down that thinking side and starting to trust the sensations of the body, feelings included?
Yeah. And so here's the deal. Our protectors aren't going to relax unless they trust us. We can't tell them to. We can try. And
there's no work orders for that. Put a work order in. Relax.
Dude, if there was a work order, I would be like frequent user. No, and this is what's so fascinating. So I'll just take it to my clinical work. And if I'm working with someone who's working on trauma, and we went to working with the exile, the younger part that's still holding the pain. And if their thinking part is like, we have got too much stuff to do today. We can't lose our shit. We can't be convalescing for 3 days after this session. Hell to the no, we're not doing this today. My response years ago would have been to push through. IFS has taught me to, okay, we won't go as fast. We won't go this fast. We don't, the other day, a client said, this is too fast, too much, too quick. And instead, I get to know the fears and the concerns of that thinking part that's trying. It's like, listen, if we don't get this job, get to work, we won't pay rent. Got a new relationship going on. This is a good guy. I don't want him to see me this way too soon. I hear all of its concerns. And then the other part just like, are you kidding me? We got to go and heal this stuff. We got to get it out so this doesn't bother us anymore. And then I go work with that part, the impatient part. And I hear all the concerns. And sometimes, this is getting a little intense, I'll get these parts talking to each other so that they can get to know, understand each other better. It's like building relationships. It's like networking, internal networking systems.
I love that.
So this is the key. Sometimes because we were just talking too, like we get stuff done. And when things are slower, that throws us because we're used to just like, let's get it done. We make things happen. And the thinking part is really important to listen to, but also help it relax too. Because if it doesn't relax and it can't think it through, then it will spin out and cause more anxiety and we'll feel like on a loop. So the way to, as you said, dial it down, or really, I call it to get it to relax or to give some space, is slowly building a relationship with it, and also doing the work with the exile and unburdening the system. Ultimately, that's clinical, more personal work. But in a personal development arena, it really is starting to just understand these protectors' concerns. So this thinking part, that's analyzing. And there might be another part that's just like, if we do this, we're not going to be seen as reputable or legit, or, all of those things. I'll never forget Brené's shared this in a couple of times. I don't know if it's on podcasts or in conversations that she's had, of how she was so criticized for making her work accessible. In the science community, in the research community, the more convoluted and highfalutin something is, then the more successful you are. And she's like, oh no, I want this to be accessible to everyone. And she took a lot of flack, and she had to do her own work to she got a lot of criticism from her peers for making her research so accessible, but it wasn't really good. It wasn't solid research. It was too woo-woo, too pop culture. And said she's just like really badass research that she's doing and has done, fierce, amazing change in the world research. Yet her peers have often, and continue to, from what I understand, not all of them, because it's their protectors, because they can stay highfalutin. So let's say we have an internalized protector like that. Like, I can't embrace the unknown. I can't have awe and wonder for uncertainty and mystery for things that feel odd to parts of me. But that's where the magic happens. And that's, again, we can go to a place when our system relaxes enough where we can sit with some curiosity. And that really is our superpower. And not the curiosity of, what'd you do? Why'd you do it? What do we need to do? That's parts led. But it's definitely, tell me more. Like, really, I want to know. And we all know what it's like to sit in front of someone who's asked us that question genuinely, and how healing and beautiful that felt. And when we give that to our system, so that's when these parts are we act up, just get curious about them and connect to build a relationship.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, for people listening, that thinking side of yourself, you can start to get it to relax by bringing curiosity, as Rebecca's saying. It's not saying that you're going to let it go and just, ignore your thoughts. It's just opening up, rather than, this is how it is, to say like, well, am I sure about that? What other information do I need? What's unfolding here? And that way you kind of bridge, I think, and give yourself a little bit more space of developing that as you start to develop that relationship. So the last thing I want to ask you about is, you were talking about compassion and empathy, and I think those are big words. And I think sometimes if someone hears that, they're like, well, if I'm compassionate, I'm just going to eat everything in sight, or I'm never going to get to the gym again. And your example about, like, I can have compassion for someone 10,000 feet away,
Mm-hmm.
or I can have compassion. How are you defining compassion specifically in relation to this interfamily systems work, so people can have a clear definition of how to work with it?
Okay, I want to make sure I do this right. So compassion is a part of the qualities of self, and then empathy is actually a manager, right? And so from an IFS perspective and from a shame resilience perspective, where empathy is present, shame can't exist. But what I've learned is that if you are sitting with me while I'm in a shame storm, Allie, and you show me empathy, you really connect with the pain I'm feeling, and I feel that, the shame dissipates. But for you, if you are doing that day in and day out, sitting in front of people and their stories of struggle, and then for you to have the courage to connect with, oh yeah, I know what it's like to feel shame, you activate that a little bit in you. If you do that day in, day out without self-compassion, you'll burn out. And so compassion is, again, it's a suffering with, it's a desire to help from almost an altruistic place, not a numbing place, not an over-functioning anxiety place. And so having compassion for the parts, the protectors of me that don't make the choices that move me towards health or move me towards my goals, it helps them relax. So circle back with me on an example. You were talking about in relation to food. So can you give me maybe a common narrative here?
Yeah. So I think when I look at kind of the spectrum, you have diet culture on one hand, and then body positivity, self-acceptance on the other. And again, there's body positivity has its own issues because it's like fit is the new strong, and it's like still putting people in boxes. But sometimes people feel like acceptance leads to resignation.
Okay. Gotcha. All right. Yes. So yes, because especially the perfectionist protectors freak out. So that's why I've actually moved from the word accept to respect, because it's almost like building a bridge to the self-love. Because there's going to be seasons, Allie, right? I mean, especially with people who are really in the throes of some gnarly eating or body issues, exercise, whatever. They need to kind of have a hard stop. Or like, this is not a good time to have certain things in my house. I don't believe that that's a forever life way to live, but sometimes we just got to triage and reboot and do some different things. But because what I was saying to clients is, just accept your body, just accept your story. And they were feeling like a couple things. First, I can't accept this. This is not my life. I don't want this to be a part of me. And that brought up a lot. Or they would try and do it and then they'd fail. And then their perfectionism would kick in and they'd feel worse.
And then they restrict, right?
Yeah, or whatever they're protecting.
Or whatever they're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, whatever. But at that example, yeah, it's like the yo-yo of white knuckle, F it. White knuckle.
Yes.
And so compassion is just saying, when someone says, Rebecca, this is a hard day. This was not your best day, huh? This is hard. And that's all. It's just like, that was intense right there. That was not my shining moment. That really, and just kind of be with that compassion, because the critical parts are saying we can't have compassion. They don't trust compassion, right? The inner critics say, no, we need to go on 5-star general internally and, verbally assault ourselves with how much we suck, because that will protect us. And compassion even will go to that 5-star general protector and say, I know you're afraid that this is going to keep happening. It's okay. You've got this. And it really isn't anything other than, dang it, that was hard. You're doing the best you can. Your best today was really different than you want it to be. And that, even when I say that, I still have parts of me that get annoyed. And like, that is so pithy. That is so lame. We just need to dig in and drill down. I have parts of me that have a hard time relaxing. So, because it feels dangerous to be in a place of just letting the emotion wash through you. Because if we don't, it gets stuck in our body, stuck in our nervous system. And so there's a place of, yeah. And a great resource, if you haven't shared it, is Kristen Neff's website. She has a self-compassion inventory based on 4 areas of self-compassion. And people can go and find out where they are in that continuum. And that will really help them understand where their protectors are running and overwhelming their life, and where they're leading from more self-leadership. From my perspective, it's a really good tool, and I use it with everybody, and it's free and it's quick. So I think it's kristenneff.com. And if you go at the top and look for like an self-compassion inventory, that's a great place to start to get curious about that. But yeah, compassion probably feels dangerous to a lot of people's internal systems, particularly the inner critics and the perfectionistic parts and the overachiever parts. And it's maybe sometimes it's just 30 seconds of compassion before the critics come in, and then it gets 60 seconds. But it's a shift, and it's a slow pivot, but when it's worth it. And when you can really sit with even really bad choices, like me yelling at my husband and dumping all of the woes of everything about family that needs to be fixed that second, there was nothing really good about that. And I just had to have some self-compassion going, yeah, this is a tender spot for you. It was not your best moment. Get some sleep and reconnect with him tomorrow. And that was hard, but I've come a long way. I would spin about that and be like, I suck. I'm so sorry. I'm the worst ever. What do I need to do? And I'd go and like cook for him and over this, and I'd be exhausted and nothing is healed. But versus, yeah, I've got to do some more work around this area in my life. So called up the IFS consultant and, and worked on that. The compassion is probably really feels dangerous, but it's really a sign of respect. And compassion, just reiterating to those protectors that are concerned, is not saying you're going to stay here forever. It's just where you're at right now, and that you're really trying. You're showing up and you're rumbling with hard stuff. And remembering that empathy, if we're constantly leading from that place, we will burn out if we're not practicing self-compassion.
I love the reframe of it being self-respect, because to me that feels a little bit more like, oh my God, we need to witness this, right? It's like, and that's part of it. And I think that's what you're describing is, again, it comes back to what we embrace dissolves. And so being present with it. And I loved, for people listening, how she said, let it wash over you. Like, again, it may feel uncomfortable, but really being with that, because it will it doesn't mean that it goes away right away, but it will lessen over time. And I love how you said, it's like, we're not going to be here forever. And yet we're here right now. And it's kind of shitty. And we did the best, because we respect ourselves.
And it has to come from self and not some platitude, cheesy Pinterest image stuff. It has to be, listen, this sucked. I see you. And no matter what you've done, you're still worthy, even if you don't feel it. And this was hard. And it is this gentle place. And it's not something that's still even a default for me. I'm working on it. Because when I don't practice that is when I get really spinny, and I don't lead from a place of self or soul leadership. I'm leading defensively and from a place of anxiety and people pleasing and spinning how I want to be seen and recover, all this stuff, trying to control things. And that's just exhausting. And Alice, I guess, to be honest too, with the work you do, you're at ground zero. And if we don't have a positive, healthy relationship, I don't know if healthy, I don't like to use that word. If we don't have a strong relationship with our body, our food, our story, it's hard to show up anywhere. And to me, it's like such a major assault on courage and on people putting their art out there and showing up, whatever it is, whether it's not just in their family, in their neighborhood, in their school, on the planet, whatever it is. This is the most acceptable way to hurt ourselves and our culture. And there's billions of dollars spent to create noise outside of our brains that activates all of our fears of not being worthy of love and belonging on the inside. And this is a noble and hard fight because there's so much money to be made and so much power involved. So I really appreciate you having these conversations. Is anyone on this path to heal their relationship with their body and their story and with food? It's essential, because some people are doing so many amazing things, but they're dying on the inside, literally and emotionally and spiritually. But integrating their story and their struggle and more people sharing it and living their truth, that's the kind of courage that's so contagious right now. But yeah, it is ground zero work that you're doing. So thank you.
Well, thanks for acknowledging that. I mean, I kind of joke that it's a Trojan feminist horse. And people are like, it's not so Trojan. We know what you're trying to get at. But why I keep doing it is because when my clients get better, they do go out with their whole selves, and they make more courageous choices at work, with their family, etc. And it's just so inspiring. Like it's hard work, but I think as your clients and both leadership and therapy would say, it's always worth it.
It is. And really changing the script that you need to have it all figured out before you show up, and that you need to be perfect to do things well. We say that and we go, of course that's not true. But I feel like we still have some detoxing and unburdening of those narratives that we've internalized. So
well, and I like those words you use, because I think our culture needs to detox from them, right? It's one thing. I actually was just in a Facebook group having this discussion of, it was Simon Sinek and Seth Godin, two white dudes that I really like, talking about imposter syndrome and saying, what if it's okay if we don't know? Like, what if that's okay? And I was like, yeah, if you're in our culture, if you're a white man, that's totally acceptable. But if you are a minority or a woman and you say, I don't know and fail, right? Or slash quote unquote fail or stumble, you are looked upon differently. You don't have the same margin of error.
I think the fears of uncertainty and sharing it are across the board. They may have different implications based on gender and race and sexual orientation, for sure. Uncertainty is dangerous to our brains. And that is something that if we can work with the vulnerability of that, if we can start to tolerate the risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure of vulnerability, of asking for help, of saying, I don't know, of getting curious when we don't know what the answer will be, that can be dangerous too. That's some brave work. And really getting curious about our own. And when we start to see when we're protector-led versus self-led, I think that's the game changer, because then burnout and overwhelm and all the physical and emotional stuff that comes with that don't hijack our life's mission.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you so much for today. I think what the big takeaways, there's so many, but start to see this inner critic, this inner food rebel as actually a protective side of yourself. As I always share with my clients, it's gotten us a lot of things in life, right? That managerial side has been really advantageous to us, and start to develop a relationship with it. Shift your mindset to realize it's protective. And as Rebecca kept pointing out, ask questions, get curious. And I think also the big thing I'm taking away is, let's call self-acceptance, self-respect, and compassion self-respect as well. And it's okay to not have it all figured out and be in the muck with ourselves and self-lead that, rather than feeling like someone else has to come in and tell us it's okay. It's like, no, I can tell myself it's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's powerful right there. Thank you again for having me, and again for all the work that you do. Appreciate you.
Oh, I appreciate you, Rebecca. Thank you. Thank you, Health Rebels, for tuning in today. Have a reaction, question, or want the transcript from today's episode? Find me at alishapiro.com. I'd love if you leave a review on Apple Podcast and tell your friends and family about Insatiable. It helps us grow our community and share a new way of approaching health in our bodies. Thanks for engaging in a different kind of conversation. And remember, always, your body truths are unique, profound, real, and liberating.